Thank you, Ronna, for sitting down with me on A Voracious Self with Green Ink Radio. How would you describe yourself?
Sitting here, this might sound really silly, but I think for much of my life, I've really been terrified of growing into a really boring person. I've always felt like I'm a decent person and well-intentioned and smart enough, but my life was really very conventional, and I just felt like, oh gosh, I'm just so boring. Yeah, so I think partly I've kind of gone out of my way to not be boring.
Where did you grow up?
Philadelphia. That was a great influence, though I didn't realize it at the time. I lived in Philadelphia with my family till I graduated from high school. I grew up in a row house, and the row house kind of lifestyle was really interesting because it was kind of like an extended family. There were maybe 25 young couples in our one row, and another 20 young couples with young kids on the row that backed up to us. And then there was a driveway between, the backyards of both rows, which we were outdoors in all the time. And if someone scraped a knee or needed a glass of water, you could pretty much go into any house along that row. So later on, when I became a preschool teacher, and I had a friend who told me, oh, kids need preschool because they need socialization. It's like, well, there are actually more efficient ways to do it. If we set up our communities right, then, kids can just grow up with a peer group right in their neighborhood, and their parents wouldn't need to be paying for it. And I loved the job, but I understood that it was its need was a consequence of our fragmenting of our families. So I wouldn't mind if communities started being able to do some of that stuff in a more efficient way. And I think someday we will have to be more efficient because, the boom of all the resources we've had over, the last 50 years, it just isn't sustainable. We're going to have to try to get our needs met in an efficient way. And I think that was the big lesson of my upbringing, was a lot of these human needs were just there in a very efficient manner because of the way the housing and the neighborhood was graphed out, actually.
How big is your family?
Not big. I have 2 siblings, an older sister, a younger brother. None of us live anywhere close to Philadelphia. But I think it did affect all of us. We were old enough that we weren't affected too much by, everyone moving out to the suburbs. It was starting, but all of us finished high school, in an urban setting.
How do you describe your childhood?
In some ways, it was really sheltered. I learned later when I was working with families of young kids that many things I took for granted were just really signs of really competent parents and sane parents. There weren't any big, scary mental health issues or substance abuse issues or any kind of abuse issues. So in a way, it was very sheltered. I was the middle child, and I loved it. I mean, the middle child position is sometimes much maligned, but I really liked being kind of left alone. And the level of independence that I had was incredible. I could, at age 11, one of my fondest memories is I and another girl, another 11-year-old, we took the train to downtown Philadelphia by ourselves. My mother had drawn us a little map of where the landmarks were. And when we were ready to come home, we dropped a dime in the payphone to tell my mother what train we were taking home so she could pick us up at the local station. Now, I can't really imagine 11-year-olds being allowed to wander in a big city by themselves. I mean, this was before cell phones. If we had not turned up, no one would have any idea where to look for us. But I think that kind of autonomy from a very young age was a really important factor in my growing up. So the family was supportive, but really, we were pretty free range.
If you could go back to yourself at age 11 now, Is there something you would tell you?
Wow, that's a hard question. I don't know. I guess the only thing, because I wasn't, really that popular, and, I was never in the in crowd. And I guess I would reassure myself that really being on the outer edges of what's considered, acceptable and trendy and popular, it's really fine to be on the edges, and being in the inner circle is probably not all it's cracked up to be.
Is there a significant moment or something that sticks out in your mind that changed your life?
I don't know. I mean, this is a practical moment, I guess. I got married really young, and I would not recommend most people do it. But so at age 18, I went off to college. I went to Chicago, spent 2 years at the University of Chicago, and then I met Bob there. It was the middle of Vietnam War era. And so we got married and dropped out at age 19. And then we had 2 kids by the time we were 25. So it isn't a moment I would necessarily recommend that people go for. It made our lives very hard for a decade, I think. But it certainly changed my idea of what my life was going to be. If you had asked me in high school whether I'd ever be interested in working in early childhood education, I'd have thought you were nuts. I had no idea until, after we got married, we moved to Israel, and we lived there for 4.5 years. And our kids were born there. We became kibbutz members, so it was a very different kind of society. And when we came back to the United States, it seemed like a very hostile environment for young families, especially young families that didn't have a lot of money. And so that's kind of why I went into early childhood education. And for the most part, I've worked with low-income families because the United States is really not that friendly a place for kids. I thought I don't know, be a chemist or something and be in academia. And my life turned out to be much more practical and much kind of closer to the earth than I had envisioned when I was younger.
Why do you think the United States is not friendly to children?
I think it's a more basic problem that I think I'm not anti-capitalist, but I think we have capitalism run amok to the point that anyone who is not producing in a tangible way is not really valued. And I even found that, in my own choice of careers. I never made any money, even though I worked in jobs that required a college degree. But I was married. It was a second income we could manage. But the single women I worked with, most of them had second jobs. There's just so little real relationship between the value of what you're doing and the remuneration that you can expect in this country. For some reason, people who are producing very tangible things are valued more. And of course, the elderly and young kids produce a lot in terms of enriching our lives, but not in terms of tangible, saleable merchandise. So I think that's a piece of it. When we were in Israel, it was not a high off the hog lifestyle, but I'd go into places like grocery stores and be really shocked that the store owners would be arranging the store to exploit kids and put the candy right at kids' eye level and almost setting up the parents and their children for conflict in the way the grocery store shelves were arranged. And it seemed like, oh, wow, this is kind of shocking that I have these preschool kids and I go shopping and I feel like they're being exploited by the market owner. That was the way I felt it was unfriendly. Not that people were actually rude to them, but they were sort of seen as a commodity to be exploited at an age when they were really too vulnerable for that to be appropriate.
Are you still married to Bob?
Yeah, we've been together for 48 years. That is pretty amazing.
Have you ever been elected to office?
I was elected. I served one term on the New London Board of Education. It was really an interesting experience. I don't think I'll ever run for elective office again. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission right now, which is an appointed office. which I really like. It's a good match for my interest in how city planning does affect quality of life. But the Board of Education was a really interesting experience. I served on one of the few boards during a time in New London when the Democratic Party was not as dominant as it is right now. So we had a mix of party members. I'm a Green Party member. There were 2 Republicans, 4 Democrats at the time on the board. And the Democrats were they didn't all have uniform opinions about things often. And I found myself in a funny position sometimes of trying to broker like tri-party coalitions on issues. We did sometimes find ourselves at odds with what the superintendent wanted to do. And it was sometimes those coalitions of 2 Republicans, a Democrat, and a Green were needed to overturn some of the things that were suggested that we didn't really care for. One of the examples was we wanted to have schools be more open to the public for use not during school hours. And some of the school administrators really wanted, if anyone used the school, they'd have to pay for it. And our view was more, the taxpayers, if they really felt that the schools were part of the community and they were welcome, then it's really an investment to make it welcoming and affordable for them to use it for whatever kind of groups. I don't know what the status is now, but we did get that kind of coalition together. Well, then it kind of got squashed, but that's another story. We passed a rule saying that if nonprofit groups that worked with youth could use the schools for free and only pay for custodial fees beyond custodians' normal hours. And as soon as we passed it, the custodians' hours were changed to where they would not automatically be there if the quitting time was shifted from 9 to 7 or from 8 to 6 or something, so that these people who use the gym in early evening would indeed have to pay the fee because of custodians' hours. We did have a good coalition trying to at least get awareness of the issue.
You mentioned that you are a member of the Green Party.
Yes.
What does it represent to you? Why did you choose the Green Party?
I was a Democrat for 30 years, from 1974 to 2004. And even when I became aware of the Green Party, which was maybe around 2000, I remained a Democrat. In a place like Connecticut and in New London, sometimes the real contest is in the primary election and not in the general election, and I liked having a voice in that. But after 2004, there were 3 primaries in New London, the presidential primary, and then there was one for a congressional candidate and one very local one for the state rep 39th district. And after that third referendum, my candidate lost every one. And then I figured, I'm so out of step with the Democratic Party. It isn't really worth my staying a Democrat just for the purpose of voting in the primaries. So unlike most political parties, the Green Party is based on a set of values. And I guess the 4 main values are like grassroots democracy, social justice, environmental justice, wisdom, whatever, and nonviolence. And those are all like values that I believe in. So although it's a political party and we have to, act like a political party, we like getting people elected. There's sort of that level of, we're not doing it just to grab power. There are some real issues that we want to promote. Then there are some other values, like those that I said before, are like the 4 pillars. And then there are the 10 values, and that includes stuff like gender equity and future focus, personal and global responsibility, community-based economics. I look at the values decentralization, which is actually one of my favorite. In the United States right now, of course, we're seeing a rise in authoritarianism. And the Green Party, in theory at least, we struggle with this, has a belief that decision making should be devolved to the people who are closest to the impact of the decision. I just couldn't help be attracted to political parties whose values really kind of matched my own.
Which certainly connects to what you started with, that it's okay to veer away from the mainstream and live on the edge. Ronna, thank you for giving us a 15-minute look at you, your life, who you are. I have a few more questions for you that will round out our discussion, but I'm going to save them for the next episode of A Voracious Self. And thank you for listening, and be sure to check out greeninkradio.com for other great shows. If you or someone you know would like to be interviewed on this program, please head to the website and fill out the interview request form. Until next time, I wish you well and encourage you to stay close to your voracious self.